Williamson students, our Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, alumni and alumni, and especially our Geneva neighbors. We warmly welcome you here. This is an important weekend for Hobart and William Smith as we celebrate our bicentennial, 200 years. There are probably just 50 other colleges in the United States who are as old as Hobart and William Smith, who have this milestone moment of a bicentennial. So we've been thinking a lot and reflecting a lot on our history, a proud one, but importantly on our future, most evident with the dazzling students who are today's Hobart and William Smith. But any observance of our bicentennial would be incomplete without stating our gratitude to Geneva, which has been a remarkable host to Hobart and William Smith for literally 2 centuries, who've sent wonderful students, who've sent wonderful faculty and staff colleagues, and who support our teams, our activities in every possible way. So as we celebrate our 200th, we give thanks and gratitude to our Geneva neighbors. Thank you, Geneva. We welcome you tonight to the second Stern Family Forum, what promises to be a lively conversation. 2 low-key individuals that we brought here. This is a new tradition at Hobart and William Smith, and we have Judge Herb Stern and his son Sam Stern to thank for this important new effort at the colleges. Judge Stern and Sam, who you'll soon hear from, have established a permanent endowed fund to host annual institutional convenings and forums like this of public discussion on significant topical issues. When establishing the Stern Family Forum, Judge Stern said, "The forum brings into focus one of the primary functions of Hobart and William Smith as a proving ground where students and the rest of us can explore, engage, disagree, analyze, synthesize, and understand more fully that each of our perspectives is one of many." Thank you, Judge Stern. So before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our format tonight. We had originally scheduled this event up on campus with our primary goal, of course, of engaging with students, but we quickly understood that the overwhelming response from campus and the community allowed us to move to this just wonderful venue of the Smith Opera House, and we thank the Smith for its hospitality. But yes, give it. Well-named William Smith Opera House, yes. In just a few minutes, Governor Christie, James Carville, and Bill Whitaker will take the stage for a dialogue. Afterwards, our students have prepared a number of questions to ask them, and at that point, Bill Whitaker will ask 2 student representatives on their fellow students' behalf to come to the mic to pose those student questions. Knowing our students at Hobart and William Smith, I suspect the questions will be lively and hard-hitting, and I'm confident that Governor Christie and Mr. Carville are well prepared, but it's going to be fun either way. As many of you might know, I've spent some portion of my career in areas and arenas that one might consider on the liberal or progressive side of the political spectrum. But I have always respected and benefited and admired difficult conversations that can happen across difference on issues that I feel are very important, tremendously important, for us to learn from one another. My own college roommate was president of the Harvard Republican Club when I was an undergraduate. And of course, I was not. But it writes itself, right? But what we had in college, and to this day, is a friendship across difference, ability to talk and dialogue across difference. I suspect I haven't convinced him of much, nor he has of me, but that dialogue and ability to model and engage in difference is important. But before we begin our conversation tonight, I'd like to ask two student leaders to join me here at the podium. Kate Equinazzi and Samari Brown are leaders of HWS Votes, an organization started on this campus in 2004 by Jane Erickson, a former trustee, and they're working on our campus to increase voter participation in this year's midterm elections. Samari is a junior. She is a student trustee, and in her senior year, she'll be a fully voting member of the Board of Trustees and therefore my boss. Kate Equinazzi is a Genevan. She is a senior at Hobart William Smith and is one of only 82 recipients in the nation to be named in the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge Honor Roll. Two great student leaders doing important work in and around HWS Votes, Samari and Kate.
Tonight we gather to celebrate a conversation across the political spectrum, and we are delighted to represent HWS Votes. Founded in 2004 by William Smith alumna Jane Erickson, HWS Votes is our campus's nonpartisan voter engagement coalition housed in the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning. As its student leaders, our goal is to ensure that every student on this campus has the resources to register to vote, learn about their election, and cast their ballot.
This election, we have the goal of increasing our student voting rate by 40%, and in August, we launched our Get Out the Vote initiative. Since then, we have conducted more than 50 classroom presentations, promoted Voter Education Week and civic engagement events, held office hours, and connected with faculty and staff members.
We believe that with this plan, we can achieve our goals and call on all of you here tonight to support and participate in this year's midterm elections. It's as easy as reminding friends to vote. Text them, call them, or ask them in person. It's just too important not to.
And for the students in the audience, we have the ability to make change on a local, state, and federal scale. According to a study based out of Tufts University, Generation Z's youth voter turnout is the highest out of all generations in the past 3 decades. We are voting more than any generation before. Our midterms might be done for school, but we still have the most important one this November.
We leave you with this. I vote because small acts lead to big change.
And I vote because people make choices and choices make history. What is your reason for voting?
I love that. Our midterms might be done for school, but we still have the most important midterm in November. That's a good line. That's good. Thank you, Kate and Samari, for your important work. It's now my pleasure to bring to the podium and to thank Sam Stern to offer a few remarks. Like his father, Sam Stern serves on our Board of Trustees. He is a graduate of Hobart College in 2003, received his law degree from Fordham University, and is a trial attorney and founder of Stern LLC, a law firm specializing in criminal and civil litigation. Sam Stern. Sam, thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here for our second forum. Our inaugural speaker, Brett Stevens, said, the most important thing we can do is to cultivate the habits of a free mind, because it's the free mind which creates our adulthood and our freedom. And that's what we're doing here tonight. Disagreement and differences of ideas aren't bad things when they're done with civility. Indeed, they are the fuel which fuels the fire of the free mind. and indeed civilization advances when that growth occurs. Some ideas rise, some ideas fall, and even more importantly, new ideas are born. I think we're all in for a wonderful treat tonight with our speakers, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sam. Well, we now begin our introductions. Let me begin by welcoming to the stage Governor Christie. Governor Christie. Governor Christie served 2 terms as governor of New Jersey. He's a former U.S. attorney in the District of New Jersey. He ran for president in 2016 and chaired Donald Trump's transition to the White House. He chaired the Republican Governors Association and President Trump's Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission. Since leaving office, he has been a regular commentator on ABC News. He is the author of Let Me Finish, a political autobiography, and Republican Rescue, about the party's future. Welcome, Governor Christie.
Thank you, Mark.
We welcome back to Geneva. We welcome back to Hobart and William Smith, James Carville. James. They were fighting backstage on what was stage right or stage left. So. It's already beginning, ladies and gentlemen. James Carville is a prominent Democratic consultant, political commentator. He's often referred to as the Ragin' Cajun. He was the lead strategist in the successful election in 1992 of Bill Clinton as the 42nd president. He's a former host of CNN's Crossfire, and has provided political consultancy to campaigns in more than 20 countries. He teaches political science at Tulane University. He has distinguished public service as a former U.S. Marine, received his undergraduate and law degrees at Louisiana State University, and in 2013, he was here on campus delivering the commencement address and was awarded an honorary degree. Welcome back, James. We had to bring a 60-minute correspondent to moderate this. Thank God it's not the president of Hobart and William Smith. Welcome back to Geneva, a member of the Board of Trustees, the distinguished Bill Whitaker. Bill?
Hello, gentlemen.
CBS 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker has reported stories from literally across the world on a range of issues. His investigation into the origins of the opioid crisis won more awards than any other 60 Minutes work, among them the DuPont Columbia University Award, Peabody, and Emmy, and the Murrow Award. He received the Founders Award for Excellence in Journalism, and in 2022 was presented with the Joseph M. Quinn Award for Lifetime Achievement by the Los Angeles Press, highest recognition. He is a member of our Board of Trustees. He chairs our Belonging, Diversity, and Equity Committee. He has been generous of his time for the colleges, on campus, and across the nation, including in 1997 and the 2008 commencement addresses, where he received an honorary degree. So we're grateful to Bill, we're grateful to Governor Christie, and to James, welcome again. Let the games begin.
Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Looks like we have a sold-out crowd here. But you saw them doing the fisticuffs when they first came out here. You should have seen them backstage. No, we're here to have a conversation about where we are, who we are, what's going on in politics, what's going on in American life, and hope that we can shed some light on some things instead of just explosive comments that you get on TV most of the time. So, gentlemen, if you are ready, let's jump in. We're what, almost 3 weeks, not even 3 weeks away from the midterm elections. In the spring, there was talk of a Republican wave. In the summer, gas prices fell, Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and that seemed to galvanize the Democrats. We're now seeing persistent inflation, rising economic anxiety. Right now, this is for both of you, which party has the momentum going into the midterm elections, and what's driving it?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at this. First is historically, take yourself out of the current set of circumstances. And historically, the party that's out of power in the White House does traditionally better in that first midterm than the party in power in the White House. So you have historical headwinds for the Democratic Party, tailwinds for the Republicans. When you add to it economic anxiety, as Bill put it very well, it's evolved to become economic anxiety over the course of the last 9 months or so. And part of that, I think, is just the raw numbers, what people see when they go to the supermarket, what they see when they go to the gas station and other places where they expend their money to help raise their families. But then there's also, I think, been a communication problem on the part of the White House. Initially, President Biden and members of their team were saying that inflation was transitory. It's a transitory problem. Apparently, the transit is going to be going on for quite some time, and he's now having to live with 8% plus inflation over the course of most of 2022. That's a bad way to go into a midterm election. So I think historic tailwinds for the Republicans, issue-based tailwinds for the Republicans right now. I do think you won't see anything, Bill, historic in terms of the number of seats, and in part that's because of gerrymandering, which we've talked about at different times during the day, which puts less seats at play. But I think you'll see 20 to 25 seats switch to the Republicans in the House. I think the Senate's a jump ball, and I think you'll see the Republicans add a couple of governorships. So I think it'll be a good night for Republicans, but not a historic night.
Bill, thank you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Bill. I don't disagree with Governor Christie's analysis a lot. Midterms are typically driven by presidential approval and direction of the country, both which are, generously to say, tepid, probably awful. And I would say the range of possibilities is that Democrats hang on to get beat pretty bad, which is, and I do think some of the energy from the summer has dissipated. I don't think that the Democrats have run a particularly effective messaging campaign. The only thing that I would give a little caution is these early vote numbers in Georgia. I don't know where they're coming from, but they're quite impressive. I mean, they're matching 2020 numbers, which doesn't happen. The other thing, and just from a historical vantage point, the turnout in 2018 was the highest in an off-year election since 1912, and the turnout in 2020 was, as we know, beyond historic. So with that many people voting, you always want to be a little cautious that you could have something distorted in the turnout model. If the Democrats are going to do okay, which is the best they could possibly do, usually females vote about 52.2%. And if they could get it up to 54, which is very hard to do, but if they had a distorted turnout model, particularly for educated, but just females in general, they might be able to do a little bit better. But I'd be hard pressed to tell you that I feel good about what's coming up in November. I do think that they don't exploit things. So Kevin McCarthy says that we will shut down the government to force Biden to make cuts in Social Security and Medicare. shutting down the government is an 85% unpopular thing. Social Security and Medicare are 85% popular thing. Why don't you just run with that to the end of the campaign? They just run with that. They told you they were going to outlaw abortion. You didn't believe them. They did. Now they're telling you you're going to shut the government down to force cuts in Social Security and Medicare. Believe them. They're going to do it. And if they just should close on that. Just close for the next 17 days. Just drive that home, because a voter will look at it and say, man, I'm getting killed by inflation, and I don't know, my 401k is down, I got nothing to lose. I have to send a message of the only way I can do it is vote against the party in power. And unless you convince people that you have something to lose, it's not just you don't have a free giveaway vote. And I don't think we're doing a very good job of doing that. I think that they keep giving us gifts and we keep turning them away from them. And they should really go for it.
Why can't the Democrats capitalize on these things that you're talking about? When you look at the issues, you're talking about abortion, you talk about guns, all of those things, when you look at the polls, most people say they want action on guns, they want action on abortion, but the Democrats can't seem to get that message across. What's up? We're a coalition. We're not really, understand, to be a Democrat, you're part of a coalition. And I don't know. And sometimes, when I've done a lot of Democratic message meetings, and they say, well, there's multi-layered different problems on different levels. No, there's not. You gotta pick a spot and you gotta run to it. And they refuse to do that. And so they all run, and you talk to these consultants, well, we got to get our positive track laid down. And the hell with your positive track, you're getting the shit beat out of you. Get over there and start throwing some punches, but it's against their nature. It's a good question. Bill, I've wrestled with this question all of my political life, and it doesn't get any better. That's all I can tell you. Well, Governor, is it messaging or is it policy that they're not able to get across?
Well, look, I mean, where you stand on that one depends on where you sit, right? I mean, I think, from my perspective, I think a lot of the policies are wrong-headed, and they've led to some of these problems. And so you got to own it. Look, I'm glad James isn't running their campaign, because I think that's pretty good. So I'm glad that they got some dumb people running their campaign. I mean, just remember, in politics, you can benefit by your own brilliance or by the stupidity of your opponent. And right now, I think Republicans are benefiting by some policies that weren't very good. Look, I think what happened to Biden was he got caught up in a policy situation where he had to promise certain things to get the nomination in terms of spending, et cetera, or at least he thought he did, for the left wing of his party. And then he got there, and circumstances had obviously changed. The economy was pretty strong and coming out of COVID pretty strongly. And even a guy like Larry Summers said, don't spend any more money. We start spending trillions of dollars more, we're going to cause inflation here. And then they did. So you got to own that piece of it. And you can only message that so much. I mean, I went into the supermarket a couple weeks ago, and I was picking up stuff that was on the list that Mary Pat gave me, and one of the things on the list was Tostitos scoops. So I go and get the Tostitos scoops, and I look at it, and it was $6.59 for a bag of Tostitos scoops, and I put them down. I'm like, shit, I don't need that for sure, and especially if I got to pay $6.59 for it, right? So that's the problem with messaging, is that you're messaging on something in opposite of the way people feel. So they go in and they see these things and they feel a certain way. So the Republicans have an easier task this time, because they're just saying, you're pissed, you're right. Yeah, prices are too high. That makes our job in the midterm easier from a policy perspective, and it's always easy to criticize the guy who's in the White House. You get the credit for things that you don't necessarily deserve credit for. and you also get the blame for things you don't necessarily deserve blame for. That's the way our system works. And so I think the combination of the two is what's causing the problem. I think it could be ameliorated by what James is talking about. And that's why I like the way he devises strategy for campaigns. He, like he said, picks a target and runs at it. And I think if you try to, determine your strategy by which way the wind is blowing on any particular day, it becomes a lot more difficult to win, rather than just saying, that's what I believe in, that's what I stand for, that's what I think people need to hear, and I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to talk about it persuasively. You do that, I think it's generally a much more successful way to run an American political campaign.
But inflation is a worldwide problem. It's not just here. As a matter of fact, we have it a little less than some of our Western allies. But you famously coined the phrase back in 1992,
Right.
the economy's stupid.
Right.
Is it the same story
So-
30 years later?
So, yeah, I did coin that phrase, but the phrase before that was change versus more the same. And the third thing was don't forget health care. But, of course, you're right. The inflation here is no worse than it is in Canada, or it is in Western Europe, or it is in Japan, or it is anywhere else. Also, the price of gas is set in a world market. Okay, it's not a price that you have WTI and Brent crude, but they run together. So the Democrats can do this, and they have. This is going to shock you, but these oil companies are having record profits. Now I know they don't have anything to do with it. So they have this idea, if they never execute, let's have a windfall profits tax, because consumers know that inflation is up, and they know that these companies are taking advantage of it. Does anybody think that Exxon and Shell and Chevron are just innocent bystanders that just pass on the increased cost of this? Of course not. I mean, that's just the nature of what they do. And, as opposed to arguing to people look, it's a world market. It's no worse here than it is anywhere else, which happens to be true, but people don't want to hear. Say, we're going to do this and get you some rebates, because I've seen people, 1,000 focus groups, and they know that there's price gouging going on, just like it's after anything there is. But we need to tell people, well, we have relief for you. But while you're going through this, but inflation is real. It's real everywhere. I don't, in the UK, they did executed the classic Republican play. We're going to come in and cut taxes on the wealthy and cut spending. Guess what? 44 hours later, the head of lettuce is still there and she's gone. All right? So it's a tough problem. But what you don't do is pivot and talk about somebody else. I know it's true. And we can get you help right now to help you till this thing resolves itself one way or the other. But there's a lot of factors that go into what the price of a gallon of gas is.
It's not a terrific campaign slogan. It's worse everywhere else.
Yeah, you can't. It's true, but it doesn't. Well, what the hell does that have to do with me? Okay, but you can say, I see what you're talking about. Here's some things we can do to help you. One of the things we can do is not cut Social Security and Medicare. If you're 67 years old and you're living through this, the last thing you need to do is to cut your payments. And by the way, one of the things you have that was instituted is you have these COLAs, these cost of living adjustments, which are quite expensive but quite effective in giving older people, of which I happen to be one, some tools to deal with this. But we don't drive that home. That's their answer. To say something once is to never say it. To say it 100 times is just getting warmed up. You got to say it 1,000 times. I mean, how many times I've heard more about transgender bathrooms, okay, than as much about that as inflation. I mean, you gotta have some message discipline and some stick-to-itness, and we haven't had that. And I'm afraid we'll pay a price for it.
Governor Christie, this is the first major election since President Trump stoked the flames of voter fraud. And meanwhile, the January 6th Commission hasn't seemed to be able to move the needle on public opinion and attitudes towards the siege, the assault on the Capitol. And that was triggered by claims of voter fraud. So why isn't the threat to democracy more of an issue in this campaign?
Well, first thing I'd say is to respond to what James said, which is, and Bill said this in part, like, I don't give a damn what the inflation is in England. I don't live there, right? And I don't care what it is in Japan or any place else, because I don't live there. And my job is to worry about my country and what you're dealing with right now. And so that's just a way to distract us from the problem. Well, it's not, it's worse in Japan. Well, okay, that's a long way away, and I don't really give a damn. And I certainly don't give a damn in the last 17 days before an election. And on oil prices, let me just say that to claim that the Biden administration is an innocent bystander and a victim of the world markets, they're not completely, because they've pursued policies to deny permitting for domestic production of oil. And I'll give you a perfect example. In the state of North Dakota, on the day that Joe Biden was sworn in, they produced 1.5 million barrels of oil a day. Today, they produce 1 million barrels of oil a day, despite the fact that there's a greater demand and higher prices. Why? Because the Biden administration will permit them to continue to take that level of oil out of the ground. And what were we doing in the interim before Russia attacked Ukraine to make up for the 500,000 barrel a day shortfall? We were buying it from Russia. Now, beside the fact that I'm not necessarily in favor of funding Putin by sending our American money over to Russia to help him, I also listen to environmentalists who are against fossil fuels, and I say, let me ask you a question. Which do you think is a dirtier production of oil? In Montana, where it's being overseen by the American EPA, or in Russia, where there is no EPA? And so, and this is the problem for Joe Biden. To win the nomination, he had to stand on the stage, and I listened to him. I made the mistake of listening to him. But now I remember, he said, no more domestic oil production, no more fracking. I'm going to ban all of this stuff. You can't do it anymore. We're going to a completely green economy, except that we don't have the tools, the ability to have a green economy right now. And so we still got to turn these lights on and heat this building and do all the rest. So he's helped through his policies of moving to the left to create a part of this oil squeeze. And then, once he realizes we don't have enough, he doesn't go for more domestic production. He goes and asks the Saudis to increase their production. And what do the Saudis say to him? That's what they say to him, because they're going to make more money out of it. So are the Emiratis. So are all the rest of the oil-producing nations, including Venezuela, who is a communist dictatorship, and we're down there begging them to produce more oil, rather than him standing up to the environmental movement in the left of his party. So that's a long answer to the question about January 6th, but I had to get that out. And now I'll answer January 6th. Look, part of the problem for the committee is that Nancy Pelosi decided that she wasn't going to let Kevin McCarthy pick who he wanted on the committee. Now, this is unprecedented. The minority leader, Republican or Democrat, always gets to pick who he wants on the committee, or she. And she didn't, because she didn't want Jim Jordan on there, and she didn't want Jim Banks on there. She didn't want those folks on there. So start off by, from a Republican perspective, saying there's no one there to closely question any of these witnesses at all. So for a lot of Republicans, they just dismiss the committee because they feel like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are not real Republicans. So that's the first problem with the committee's credibility with the base Republican voter. The second thing is that the American people will care about this issue a lot if Donald Trump is ever back on the ballot. Because they get it. They know Trump was responsible for January 6th. They get it, but he's not on the ballot in 2022. And yes, you have people who are election deniers on the ballot and all the rest of that, but they don't hold those people responsible for January 6th. They know who's responsible for January 6th, and it's Donald Trump. So I think that January 6th becomes a much bigger issue in 2024 if Trump is a candidate for president. Then I think it will be an issue in the Republican primary if he runs, and if he ever were to be the nominee, it will be an enormous issue in a general election in 2024. What he did, what he didn't do, what he said, how he lied, how he conducted himself in ways that, in my opinion, are well beneath the office that he was privileged to hold. And but right now, people are like, yeah, we'll deal with Trump if he comes back, but in the meantime, it's 6:59 for the Tostitos, and I gotta deal with the 6:59 for the Tostitos before I deal with the threat to democracy, because they feel like if there is a threat to democracy, Bill, it's in Donald Trump's actions, and not as much with the people that are running for governor of Georgia or, for a House seat in Montana. And they want to focus those people on things that are much more of a direct concern to them today.
So,
You, of course, agree.
But it's a lot to unpack. Hey, Governor, you're right. Japan is a long way from here. I tell you what's close. Canada. I believe I'll look at the map. You ever heard of anybody going to Canada to get cheaper gas? No. And in terms of permitting, there are 3,000 unpermitted wells that are not being drilled. And I'll tell you what people will tell you in the oil company, because they'll say, look, you're telling me I'm going to drill a well and it's $85 a barrel oil. Well, I'd put millions of dollars in that well, and that well is not going to start producing for another 18 months. How do I know what the price of oil is then? So if it's such a problem, then it ought to be easy in Canada. It's not. There's no line of people from Buffalo going to Canada to get gas. All right? It is a worldwide market. There are 3,000 unused permits right now. And what Biden said he was going to end, to be clear, he was going to end fracking on federal lands. Not ban fracking altogether. So the oil industry doesn't operate. They don't get the price tomorrow. They get sunk into it. But if they want to drill, there is no lack of permits. Not at all. I think it's 3,000 unused permits. It's already been permitted. Totally legal. You can highball, green light. So in terms of the January 6th stuff, first they offered a 9/11 commission thing. They didn't want that. Then they offered to do this, and then they said, so Pelosi says, because they appoints 5 people, 2 were possibly involved in it, and I think they'll find out they were, Jim Jordan and Banks. She says, well, I'm not going to take those 2 because there's a conflict. Send me 2 more. So Kevin McCarthy says, I'm not going to send you anything. And I don't know how any Republican could look at Liz Cheney and say she's not a Republican. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that Dick Cheney's daughter with a 97 rating from the American Conservative Union is not a Republican. And I'm sorry, that was a massive act, criminal act. I think it was a massive treasonous act. And you cannot let that go unattended. They have to be, if you have anything that happens, you're in the military, something bad happens, I guarantee you, you're going to have, if an airplane crashes, they'll say, well, shit, it just crashed, let's forget about it. No, let's find out why it crashed, what happened, and what can we do to make sure it doesn't crash again. That's the nature of the beast. But what are you supposed to do? And whether they move public opinion or not, if people want to think, what I saw was a staggering act of criminality and a staggering act of, in my own opinion, of treasonous behavior. And you just can't say, well, we'll forget about it, we'll leave it to the courts or anything else. We need to know, and I think that we're finding out more by the day. History will find out more by the day. Mr. Garland will find out more by the day of what this is. But accountability, it has to. If you want to hold a third grader accountable on a test score, fine. Hold people that encourage someone to attack the Capitol of the United States to stop a mandated procedure by the Congress. They ought to be held just as accountable as that third grader. That's my view.
Bill. By the way, I don't disagree with any of what he just said, but that wasn't the question. The question was, why isn't the January 6th committee breaking through? Why isn't it moving public opinion?
Why isn't our democracy in jeopardy?
Right.
Why isn't that a bigger issue in this
So that's
campaign?
the question he asked me, and that's the answer I gave. If what we want to talk about is whether we thought that the actions of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th were criminal and treasonous, granted.
Right.
Okay? That's not the question, though. The question in this context was, why isn't this a bigger and more important issue for the electorate who are going to vote for 17 days from now? And my analysis of that is because with some of the voters, hard Republican-based voters, they don't believe the committee has credibility. And with others, they believe that the threat is not imminent because Trump is not on the ballot. And as a result, they're willing to focus on other issues which they consider to be more important to them currently. And it's not me dismissing January 6th. It's me saying that the tab will be paid on January 6th by those people who committed the criminal acts, by the prosecutors who will bring those cases and are bringing those cases and have convicted people already. And it's going to be up to the Attorney General of the United States whether he wants to bring a criminal case against former President Trump or any of the people in the senior people in the administration who are being investigated for what role they played in potentially encouraging or inducing what went on at Capitol Hill. But all of that is a question that's a different question than the one you asked me. So let's not confuse what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not affecting this election. And it's not my opinion. You look at every poll about what issues people think are most important in this election, and January 6th usually comes in around 7th or 8th on that list. Now, if Donald Trump were on the ballot, my guess is it would be in the top 3 or 4. And so, that's just the politics of what we're dealing with right now, but it doesn't change the way I feel about what happened on January 6th, or the way most people in this country feel about what happened on January 6th, which was it was an awful act, unjustified, unjustifiable, and I think it also showed the strength of our democracy. Because when those acts occurred, those men and women, by 4 a.m. the next morning, in the House and the Senate, were back on the floor of both of those places, voted to certify the election of Joe Biden, and the reason they did was because they followed their duty and their responsibility, and they followed the truth, which is that Joe Biden won that election and Donald Trump lost it.
We're talking about inflation and democracy, and both right now are worldwide problems. We've got, just like inflation is going up around the world, democracy is under attack in many countries, and autocracies are on the rise. And we're sort of in a situation that we have not seen since the end of World War II. So you're two smart men. What's going on? Seriously, why are people losing faith in the value of democracy? Seem to be.
Well, a couple of points, and it's kind of lengthy, and I'll probably wonder more than I should. First of all, what is democracy? I mean, I don't mean that like on a college campus, do I exist? Some of that kind of crap you used to hear. Am I really here? Democracy, 18% of the country elects 52 senators? I don't know. All right? Some people, you have gerrymandering, you have different stuff, you have federal judiciary. The Democrats win the popular vote 7 out of 8 times, which has not happened since the dawn of political parties. The Supreme Court is 6-3 Republican. They overturned the 2020 election. The 2000 election. I don't know, is that democracy where you stop a vote count? Is it democracy when Scalia dies and Mitch McConnell said, we're just not going to take a vote? I'm going to arbitrarily decide that the Supreme Court has 8 people and not 9 until I get what I want. So, and people are losing some faith. What's happened in the United States is that people become, a certain people had a privileged spot in the United States. So I'm 1973, I'm a white male, I go to LSU Law School. There's 1 black and 3 women in the entire class. I didn't know what a BMW or a Sony was. Japan and Germany were flat on their back. Well, such is not the world we live in anymore. And when people say we want to make America great again, what they talk about, they want to go back to 1956, which if you're a racial minority, a woman, or gay, or anything else, that's not your banner year. You don't go back and say, boy, I want to get back to 1956. And you're right, certain people's status has been challenged. But that's the way that the country is. As people come in, anybody that's taught, and I taught at Northern Virginia Community College, I taught at Tulane, I taught at LSU, and I got to tell you, and this is people, I talk to people, I talk at the service academies, Ivy League schools, everything. The females are just kicking the crap out of these boys. They just are. You go, they all sit in front of the classroom, and we talk about male fragility. I tell my male students, you got to get on the stick, Junior. These girls are going to smoke your ass, boy. You better move. You go to any law school today, I guarantee you it's 60% female. And you're right. I was lucky. I happened to grow up at a time in history where I had a kind of privileged status. Well, people like me don't have the same privilege, and you got to get used to it. That's the country you live in. The country is growing, and there's a huge generational divide. People over 50 have one view of the United States. People under 50 have a different view. And in the long run, the people under 50 are going to win. Okay?
In the long run.
Or even in the immediate run.
Yeah.
But there is turmoil in the country. By the way, we don't run the world the way we used to. In 1973, China was having a madman. All right? A total madman. And no one even knew what was going on. We live in a much more competitive world now. And we're not going to be able to go back. There's no mysterious point that we can go back to in our past. And it's the way it is. It's the nature of politics. But the appeal of Trump was, I'm going to make it like it was. What was amazing about it is, it was a retro argument that people bought into. And of course, and they have and understand, the Trump people have a beef. They really do. It's not like you just imagine this. A lot of things that we thought that were true, a lot of people did, that, if China became part of the world's trading complex, that they would see the values of that. Hey, but then we try to do something smart, the TPP. So Obama and Hillary said, look, China's a real thing, so we're going to get Australia and New Zealand and Thailand and Vietnam and Japan and Korea and Canada and Mexico and the Philippines, and I'm probably forgetting other places, and we're going to form this trading bloc to counter China. Because, by the way, China's ruthless to the people in Southeast Asia too, it's not just us. And of course, they kill it. And you can't go back, you can't live in a world, I mean, I guess you could try, but you can't live in a world without trade. And we certainly, I give Biden a lot of credit on this chip thing. We let ourselves get caught short on that and some of this stuff. And you got to make it about, but you got to adjust to the world that you live in, not the world you used to live in. And we just, the power of the United States, in 2000, when Bill Clinton left office, it was widely reported by a lot of conservatives, George Will, Bill Kristol, Charles Krauthammer, and more, to say that the United States in the year 2000 was the most ascendant nation culturally, economically, and militarily since ancient Rome. It was probably true. Does anybody believe it? 22 years later? That's not the way the cow ate the cabbage. And it's probably not going to go back to that way. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we go in a society that recognizes that talent comes from a lot of different quarters in it, and how do we honor and promote that talent? And the people that don't have the talent, how do we bring them up through here? And that's the nature of it, Bob. We're not turning back no matter how hard you try.
So how do we move forward, and where is American democracy being challenged? Is it in jeopardy?
Well, damn, man, American democracy has been challenged from the day it started.
I know.
So
but it's always been, just take my life, in my lifetime, there's always been a sense that we were expanding American democracy. We were bringing more people in. We were making it more accessible to more of us. And all of a sudden, we're fighting over whether that ideal is something we want to do or should do anymore.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think people who object, so I think you're implying on immigration there. I think the people that object on immigration just say, like, can we either follow the laws we have or establish new laws so that we have rules? Like, I don't think it's fair. For instance, we have folks, friends of ours in Austria, who can't get to this country and become citizens because Austria's reached their limit. But under this current administration, if the people from Austria flew to Mexico and came over the border, they'd be able to be in the United States. Like, I think that there has to be a set of rules that continue to bring our country more and more people to it. One, because that's our tradition. Two, it's because one of the things we have right now in our economy is an incredible labor shortage. We have a real serious labor shortage in this country, and the only way to fix that is going to be to bring more people here to work. And so I don't, unemployment, despite inflation, despite all these other things, unemployment is traditionally low still. Post-COVID, much of that has come back. So we need to do things like that and continue to do things like bring people into this country. But let's find a way to do that where people think it's fair.
We've been trying to have a comprehensive immigration bill since George W. Bush.
Absolutely right. And,
and have never succeeded.
Right. But there's plenty of stuff that took a long time in this country to happen that we ultimately succeeded on. And I'm not ready to give up. I mean, I think, the part of democracy is it's hard. And it was designed to be hard. All of the institutions that the founders set up, they designed to make doing things hard. You've got a Senate of 6-year terms and 100 people, 2 from each state. You got a House that gets elected every 2 years and is much more reactive to the winds that are blowing politically in the country. Both of them have to agree. You got to get a president who signs it. It's not like a parliamentary system. We're in a parliamentary system, man. You got the majority. You just jam everything through. There's no executive that has to review that. The head of the government in Great Britain was, we don't know who the hell it is now, but whoever is the next victim over there in Great Britain, their executive is the prime minister, who's the person who's the majority leader. It's like having Chuck Schumer God forbid, be the president of the United States, you know? And that's what that system is. That system is a lot easier to bring change. I'm not pessimistic about democracy, and I'm not pessimistic about America's future role in the world. People are not charging to China because they want to live there. In fact, China is going to have a population problem, an enormous population problem, because of their one-child policy. They're aging like crazy over there, and they don't have young people to fill in behind them. And you don't see people like on the Russian border sneaking over to China because they want to live there, all right? We still live in the best neighborhood in the world. We don't wake up every morning worrying about whether Canada or Mexico is going to invade us. We don't worry about whether we have friendly governments surrounding us. We still have most of the advantages that we had harkening back to 2000. The question's going to be, are we going to be smart enough to exploit those advantages and the disadvantages of our adversaries, or aren't we? And I'm not one of these people. China is ascendant, but I don't believe China is on, and for the population reason. And by the way, you have in China a government that's now become officially an autocratic dictatorship, with Xi Jinping now going for his third term. And he's killing people who oppose him. Say what you want about what happens in this country, but that's not a model that I think is going to appeal to most people around the world. So exploit our advantages, exploit the weaknesses of our opponent, and I still think that we're better positioned than any country in the world to be an example if we choose to be. But the one thing about the thing about Trump's foreign policy that I disagree with the most is his desire to pull us back from the world. You know, didn't like NATO, didn't like the TPP, didn't like us. You know, look, nature abhors a vacuum, everybody. And if we're not providing that leadership around the world, someone else will. And the nominees are not pleasant. China's number one. To some extent, Russia is still a player in that. And then you've got rogue players like North Korea and Iran that want to play some role in that, and autocracies in the rest of the Middle East. Look, when people come to me and say, why should we be sending all this money to Ukraine? Because I get some people in my party who say that. Why should we be sending all this money to other places in the world? Why do we have foreign aid? My answer to them is always the same. That is the price you pay for living in the richest and freest country in the world. Pay the price.
I actually agree with most everything that the governor said.
Good night, everybody. I'm leaving. See you later.
The thing I agree with, you said 4 years ago, if you said, describe China, I would say a rising power. Today, I would say a decline in power. Yep. And the demographic stuff the governor talked about is as real as a heartbeat. They got a terrible demographic problem. We have a demographic problem. All right? They have a terrible, and we know how this can be, a terrible real estate over leverage. And you don't know because you can't believe they just stopped sending economic numbers out. They just no longer send. I mean, no matter how bad our numbers are, at least we get them. And there's some confidence that what we see is kind of in the ballpark. So what the answer to a lot of our problems is actually immigration. So I live in New Orleans. How many roofers you think came in after Katrina that were born in the United States? As close to this number as you can get. How many roofers and drywall people and carpenters and everything else you think they're going to need in Southwest Florida? They have no idea. And when I go from my place to Florida, I go by inner Florida, I expect to see a sign within 6 months. Governor Ron DeSantis welcomes all to Florida. No papers necessary. Just come on down. If if you think about it, you hear these stories of these mothers with 2 kids, you know, mother with 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. They walk from Guatemala to the border. I got to tell you, that's a motivated person.
Yeah.
I might say, you know, come on in. I think you can handle some real work here. I mean, and the thing that always cracks me up about immigrants, and I always tell people this, the people that hate them the most, you don't have to worry. They're not going to West Virginia. They have no interest in going there. They want to go to Houston, they want to go to Miami, they want to go to Los Angeles, they want to go to Chicago or New York or somewhere else. They're not looking to go to northern Wisconsin. You don't have to worry. You're cool. All right? And what people don't like, and of course, you got to ask yourself, would you rather live in a country that people are trying to get into or one that people are trying to get out of?
Good point. Yeah.
All right? And I understand there's disorder, and they've tried to fix. Bush, to his credit, really tried. McCain tried. You know, a lot of people tried. Obama tried, and it just got bogged down because you have 2 problems. You have 14 million that are here already. That no one. You know, do you really want to send it? I think George Will pointed out, if you put every person on a bus that was here illegally, the line would go from Laredo to Toronto. That's what it would take to get all of the people, you know, and so and everybody, Governor Christie understands that. Everybody, you know, you got that problem. Then you got the problem of asylum seekers. All right, it's always part of international law. All right, and the people from Venezuela, by the way, they have a pretty good case for asylum under that rule. How do you think, like all the people in South Florida, the people from Cuba, how did they all come here? Because we have asylum laws, and we always do. And you know, right now, and they're entitled to a hearing, but all of our, at some point. Most all of our, except for yours, which will we're here because we were looking for asylum from somewhere else. I mean, that's just the nature of what the country is. And I just wish that, like, somebody stand up and say, yeah, you know what? These are by and large, we know they commit less crimes. We know that a greater number. We're having trouble with military enlistments now. The Army is having a terrible problem. You know who enlists at a higher rate than anybody else? Immigrants. All right? If you're in Guatemala and you say, hey, you got 3 hots in the cot and a paycheck, that looks like a pretty good deal. All right? But I agree. I generally agree with Governor Christie's overall assessment of this problem. And it's hard, but everything is hard.
What is
I mean, what isn't hard? And we've got to stop telling people that school is easy. It's not. So I was looking at this thing at NYU, had an organic chemistry professor.
Oh, yeah.
But you're a pre-med student at NYU, goddammit, you're supposed to have hard courses. All right? I mean, it's just, but it didn't make any sense. And he said, well, but we don't need to, you know, you're not studying to be, you know, work at a tire store. You're studying to be a doctor. It's by nature that stuff is hard.
I hope.
It's real hard.
What I like about you guys is that you moved on into it. When I mentioned democracy, I was not trying to get into immigration, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
But what
I have a sixth sense,
Yeah,
Bill.
you picked it up. But what I was asking about, we're in a college town talking to largely a young audience, and they seem to have not dropped out, but don't have incredible interest in what's going on in the political spectrum. You're talking about climate change and gun control and all these sorts of things, and you hear young people say, well, nothing gets done anyway, so why am I going to get involved? You were talking this afternoon about, you know, it's always the sleeping giant. The kids are going to come out and vote, and in every election season, they don't. How do you engage? How do you get the young folks to come out and vote?
Hell, man, if I knew I would be president. But look, I do think that there is something to life experience teaching you how important voting is. Right? When you're 18 or 19 or 20 or 21, you have a certain life experience. And you don't necessarily know how much the government and the folks who make those decisions affect your lives every day. You don't feel it. You know it maybe intellectually, but you don't feel it emotionally. And I think that part of this problem is an unsolvable problem, which is that, you know, there are some people at that age who inherently get it, understand it, are fascinated by it, and vote. You know, and I remember my first vote was in 1980 in my dorm at the University of Delaware, filling out an absentee ballot to vote for Ronald Reagan. And man, I wouldn't have missed that for anything. I had 2 roommates. Neither one of them voted. And when I was voting, I was sitting at my desk filling out my ballot. They were like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "It's a presidential election. I turned 18 in September. I get to vote in November." And one roommate said, "It's all bullshit." And he walked out. And my other roommate picked up his bong, took a long hit, looked back at me and said, "I'll think about it, dude." 3 totally different life experiences in a very small space in 208 Harrington E at the University of Delaware. I think some of it's inherent with age, but I don't find young people unengaged. I wouldn't necessarily correlate voting with disengagement. Like when I talk to young people, they really engaged on issues. They care about climate change. They care about policing policies. They care about the economy and whether they're going to have the opportunity to get a good job and buy a home or have a good place to live. And they care about those things. And they have opinions about them. They just don't necessarily draw the line between those concerns and voting. And part of that is the failure of the candidates. Now, look, the best turnout we've had for young people in my lifetime was in 2008 when Barack Obama ran. And I think part of that was a historic phenomenon, but also part of it was he's pretty good. He's a good candidate, and he knew how to appeal and speak in a way that was attractive to people of all kinds. That's why he won. But particularly, you had a pretty good youth turnout in 2008. So I don't, there's no silver bullet in my view. There's no magic elixir to do this. I see young people here tonight. That's encouraging on a Friday night. After listening to me and James, they may need to drink more on Friday night than they normally do. But I saw one guy's back there like, yeah, it's your ass. I'm hitting that bar right now. But I am encouraged. I'm encouraged by one thing, discouraged from another. I'll finish with this. I'm encouraged by the opinions being expressed. Like when I go to colleges to speak, man, I get a lot of feedback and a lot of opinions from students, and that's encouraging to me. The thing that's discouraging is the thing that James touched on. Like, look, it may be our generation that did this to you, or at least permitted it, but I am so tired of the participation trophy society. Everybody's good, everybody wins, everybody gets a trophy. And if classes are too hard, we'll make them easier. Please don't get upset, and don't get angry, and don't feel any of those emotions of loss or disappointment. I made all 4 of my children, by mandate, have to be New York Mets fans. I did this so that at a young age they can understand pain and disappointment. They could be Yankee fans, but what the hell do you learn by being a Yankee fan? You're a Mets fan, you know that even when the sun is shining bright and they win 101 games, you know they're going to screw you. You just know it. And they lose to the Padres, right? So, I mean, what's more disgusting and disappointing than losing to the Padres in those brown and mustard uniforms? Right? What I want you guys to learn is that loss and disappointment and disillusionment makes you stronger. And that life is going to kick you in the rear end a bunch of times. And what matters is how you get up. And if we never teach you how to get up, then we've failed. And so that's what discourages me, is that I feel like I got a bunch of participation trophy people who feel like anything they do should be rewarded. But what I'm encouraged by is I see more feedback on things that really matter to the future than I've seen before. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I did.
Look at a picture of the people in the Higgins boat on D-Day. You know what they all were? Young. Look at the people on the front line at Selma at Edmund Pettus Bridge. You know what most of them were? Young. All right? And I'm sorry, and we think of young people, sometimes we think of people like here at HWS. There are probably more young people at Miami-Dade Junior College than there are in every college in upstate New York put together. I mean, think about that. Think of how many people at the community college in Seattle or Houston, or just don't go. But the truth is that there is some drop-off. I mean, young people have, if you don't step up and vote now and participate, you're going to end up in the modern version of a Higgins boat, which I don't think you really want to do. And people, when we've had changes in this country, by and large, it's driven by people 40 and under. That's just the way people like me are too old and too tired to change anything. Right? But I think we could do better. I agree. It's hard. It's a hard work, and you shouldn't fool people into thinking that it's not. You shouldn't fool people. And I see it, and I go to these campaigns, and they say, well, people that work on the campaigns, they don't want to work on Sunday anymore. What are you doing working on the campaign? Go do something else. It's 90 days. You're supposed to work on Sunday. What is that? And so it's a little bit like, yes, it's your country. You have something to say about the shape of its direction. And if you don't, there's two ways you can go through life. You can go through life making rain or getting rained on. And we've got too many umbrellas in this country with young people. Get rid of them. Yeah. So go make some rain. That's what I would say.
It was the perfect segue.
And let me just say, my slogan on that one, James, is, in this country, you can either be a victim or a perpetrator. And I mean that in a positive way. You either sit back and allow yourself to be victimized, or you go out and make something happen. And this country gives you an opportunity to do that like no other country in the world. Go out and make something happen. Don't wait for something to come to you.
I agree 100%. It's like I say, half the people in this country are just, we need motivation.
Nope. We've got questions from young people.
Oh my goodness. Actual young people here. Wow.
So the first question is, can you describe an event or argument that changed your political views in some significant way?
So, well, yeah. I mean, I grew up, South Louisiana in the 50s, and I didn't ever think about it as a kid. I was doing whatever it is, and like just one day concluded, hey, some people are getting a bum rap around here. This is not the way it's supposed to work. I mean, I've made observations. I changed as I went along. There was probably a time in my life, I don't think about it, but you would have asked me, I probably wouldn't have been for gay marriage. I have no good reason why. I certainly don't feel that way today. I've become maybe, I used to be pretty liberal, more liberal than I am now on some criminal justice issues. I mean, I think that it's two contrary things. That a lot of people don't need to be in jail for things like marijuana, but there are some people that just need to be in jail. I'm sorry. Maybe there are good reasons why they went astray, but you don't have any choice. I think that, probably a number of things. I mean, people evolve over time. I mean, if I thought the same thing today that I thought when I was 15, I'd be a pretty sorry human being, wouldn't you think? But I don't know. You change. I'm open.
Yeah, look, I think for me it would be gay marriage. I think I was raised as a Catholic in a pretty traditional values home, and I always felt like those traditional values were extraordinarily important for me to defend and speak on behalf of across the board. But I think as I've gotten older and gotten to see more of life and gotten to understand, after being married myself for 36 years, about what the nature of love is and how hard it is to find someone you love who loves you back and who provides you that sense of stability and challenge and comfort and excitement that comes in the best of human relationships. I've come to think over time that it's not for me to choose who provides those things for you. And I didn't always feel that way. So I don't know if it was a particular event, but I think it was an evolution over time that changed my point of view on that, from where I was, let's say, in my 30s and 40s to where I became in my 50s and 60s.
Our next question is, what aspects of our political system do you think are outdated or otherwise don't serve the country in our present moment, and how would you reform them?
I heard most of the question. What was the...
Well, what parts of our political system do we think are outdated, don't serve us well now, that you would change?
Well, there are any number of things that I would change, but they're not going to change. All right? I mean, remember, our political system has changed. When the Constitution was written, you had to be a property-owning white male to vote. But no one thinks that's a good idea now. All right? When the Constitution, until the last century, state legislators elected United States senators. All right? We didn't have, you couldn't levy an income, the Supreme Court said you couldn't levy an income tax. You had Plessy v. Ferguson. All right? Actually, we fought a civil war. After that, you had Jim Crow, which was ensconced in the law. The country changed. It is not it's not like we're incapable of it. If I was starting all over again, I don't get to start all over again. I probably would think the Electoral College doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I could give you 1,000 reasons, but it's not going to change because the people of Wyoming have a lot more power than the people of California, and they're not going to give it up. And the people of North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, Alaska, et cetera, are not. It's just not going to happen. So you can, as we say in the Marine Corps, you can wish in one hand and poop in the other and see which one fills up the fastest. They don't say poop, but that's all right. But the change is the one thing that I think would do more good than anything. Is pass a constitutional amendment and says nothing in this Constitution shall prohibit Congress from regulating money in political campaigns. That I think, is a lot what's at the core of our problems. And you just, when you go to Washington, I went and I was there for a while, and you go back and people said, man, James, it sounds like it's really screwed up there. You know, the system said, you have no idea. It's so much worse than you think. Oh my God. Once you get inside and see, and you have this disproportionate power balance in the country that's just brought about as a result of just flooding money. Now, you're never gonna take the politics out of politics. I would never want to do that. But you can, and if you go look at a chart and have to register these lobbyists, you look at the number of lobbyists we started this century with, and look how many we have now, or you look at the total amount of fundraising that's going on, and you can see it right in front of you. And I have no idea, I mean, I don't agree with the Supreme Court on this. I have no idea. I think Congress should have an explicit grant of power to regulate money in political campaigns. Because if you don't, you're going to keep having this very justifiable questioning of how fair or how rigged our political system is. And in my mind, it's unfair and it is pretty rigged. And you say, well, both parties do it. Okay, that's great. Both parties do it. They had, the Democrats had so much money they were getting from Big Pharma that they weren't allowed to even criticize Big Pharma at one time. I mean, when you go watch these documentaries on this opioid stuff, make you throw up. I mean, that L.H.D documentary, Crime of the Century, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that they pumped into it's breathtaking. I mean, it's just utterly breathtaking. And the more that deeper you dig into it, the worse it is. And you're right, it's safe to say no one looks very good in this. They don't. And human beings sometimes need some curbs on their behavior. And that's, you know, was it Madison said if men were angels or something? They're not angels. Yeah. But they need supervision.
Governor?
First off, I agree with James' premise that none of this will change. But if I were made emperor for the day, I would change it to 1 6-year presidential term. Having been a 2-term governor, and I think in the presidency it's very much the same, you know, you basically have 2 years. Because after the first 2 years, you start getting ready to run for re-election. And when you start to do that, everything looks different. Everything looks different. As hard as you try for it not to look different, it does. And so then you kind of have the problem, or then you get reelected. And once you get reelected, everybody's like, okay, who's the next person? Because this guy's out in 4 years, so who are we going to get next? I do think that giving someone the momentum of those first few years and knowing that you don't have to run for re-election, most incumbents are at their strongest right after they're elected. Most office holders, rather. And I do think there might be something to, you know, 1 6-year term for a president to allow him or someday her to focus on the job and know that you got 6 years to do this job and do everything you can in that 6 years to get it done rather than spending, you know, a good portion of the time worrying about how you're going to get reelected.
If I was starting over again, I think I would very actively consider that idea. But, you know, it's the whole thing, we rung the bell and it's hard bell to unring.
Yeah, it's not, you're not going to ring that bell. You're not going to change any of the stuff.
A good discussion. Go ahead.
You have another?
Yes. The next question is to Mr. Whitaker. If you could redesign the president debate format to make it more substantive, what would you do?
Redesign presidential debate format to make it more substantive.
I am not a big fan of the commission. And they had the presidential commission, and since Danforth started, they had and guess where they have a debate every year? At WashU in St. Louis. You ever notice that? You know, I always thought, like, you run in the public. I think the debates are useful. I mean, we certainly put a lot of effort into it. But let the campaigns make the rules themselves. And if somebody doesn't show up, then blister them. And, you know, I think the less in these primary debates, oh, God, I don't know how you do them. And they have, like, the kids' table. They have 5 and then 5 in another thing.
But not only that, it's sort of like it's become a show.
Yes.
You've got all the podiums lined up. They're all, you know, they've got the red, white, and blue, and it's waving on the podium.
The campaign's like that.
The cameras
honestly,
it's like a game show.
It is. You're obviously, you know, one of the leading journalists in the country. It's more like a press conference than a debate.
Yeah.
And they negotiate the rules. Okay. So I asked Governor Christie, you have 2 minutes. James, you have a minute. Governor Christie, you have 30 seconds. They actually negotiated back and forth. So all of us know, you know that, hey, we're sitting here, there's people, my job is to ask good questions. All right, you know your job is to give good answers, but don't filibuster and you give me a chance to speak and my chance to say, well, I disagree with you on this, and you go back. It's a self-regulated thing. And the audience is able, without, you know, Mark Guerin or the HWS board saying, this is it. People should know at a certain level in their life, assuming you run for president, you have the skill to stand on your own and understand what you can get away with and what you can't.
Didn't Lincoln and Douglas just sit and
they would
talk
go
to each
for
other?
Hours.
Yeah,
hours.
Just talk to each other?
You guys would never give us that much time on the air.
The public would.
Too damn expensive.
And they would show up. It was a social event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
but instead of making it the question and answer thing, why not have the two candidates?
I think if you're running for a major office in this country, in my view, you should be willing to tussle in any of those formats. But I'm not someone who believes. I changed the question a little bit. It's not should they be more substantive. It's like, are they revealing enough? Because in the end, I think they are. Like, you would not call the first Trump-Biden debate of the last cycle substantive. But you sure as hell would call it revealing. Like, if you didn't understand after that Trump was losing it, and like really yelling and screaming and interrupted Biden 79 times in 90 minutes. And then on the other side, Biden at times was giving answers that weren't responsive to the questions and not in the way that people normally dodge the question, but like in a way where you're like, did he hear the question? Like, I think that's all revealing. I participated in those crazy debates, the primary debates in 2016, where there were 10 of us on the stage. And then there was another one that was like the kids' table, right? It was, first of all, the way they made the decision to do it was awfully wrong. They did it on poll numbers. Like, you're in one debate if your poll numbers are at a certain level, another if you're not. I think the Democrats did it much better in 20, where they just did it randomly. And so you had people watched both sets of debates because, well, it wasn't all of the most famous people in one debate and least famous in the other. Everyone had to mix it up. But I had a fairly prominent debate moment in 2016 with me and Marco Rubio, where we went back and forth with each other, and it became pretty clear that, like, he went up to it. He was repeating, amazingly to my great gift, 4 times the same statement, the very same statement, that was non-responsive to the question, that it was obvious his advisors had told him to memorize and say beforehand. I can even remember it. It was something like, put aside the illusion that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. Barack Obama knows exactly what he's doing. He wants to change America. I don't want to change America. I want America to be the greatest country in the world. When I'm president, it will be. So he says that the first time. Then I go back at him and say, like, Marco, you know, the memorized speech when you're president, it doesn't get you anywhere. Like, you have to make real decisions on problems that just come up. And he says, he insults me and then says, But let's dispense with the illusion that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. And I'm standing there thinking to myself, shit, this is great, right? And I just go, there it is. There it is, the 30-second memorized soundbite that your advisors give you. Is that what you want from a president? So my point to you is that, these moments can be incredibly revealing. And I wonder whether or not it isn't more important to have these debates reveal character than reveal policy.
I agree. But then, we can never forget, I'm sorry, the great Rick Perry. I mean,
that was revealing in both ways.
Yes. And are you going to be able to reveal policy in a 90-second answer? Not
you
really.
Can't. No.
You can't, but you shouldn't try. But you can give somebody insight. You can get insight to the way they think or make decisions. I mean, I think it's valuable. But a lot of this blame goes to the campaigns. So if I'm running a campaign, I have one job. I'm trying to win for my candidate. And so I'm going to try to get every rule that I can have any influence to do what I think is in the perceived interest. Now, sometimes you do stuff that's in your perceived interest and it blows up with you, but every now and then you get old man Bush to look at his watch and you go, whoa, thank God, Yeah. You get some moment like that. And they generally don't decide much, but I do think that they just become very formulaic, very much of a press conference. The truth of the matter is, you know this too, the journalist gets to be as big a star as the candidate, and that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Not the way.
No, that's not what you're trying to do.
Let me reveal one other moment to all of you, because I fundamentally disagree with the fact that these aren't useful. Right? 2000, George W. Bush and Al Gore, they're doing a town hall debate. So they're on stools, right? And there's an audience surrounding them. And Bush is up giving an answer. And Gore inexplicably gets up from his stool and walks like this close to Bush while he's in the middle of the answer. And Bush has got his microphone, and you can feel him, and he looks, he goes, how you doing? And then he keeps giving the answer. I was sitting on the couch watching this with my wife, and I turned to her, it's the third debate, and I said, it's over. She goes, what do you mean it's over? I said, Bush is going to win. And she said, what the hell from that? I said, everybody's been in a bar where you're talking to somebody, and some other person comes up and is standing like right here. How does the normal person react? You go, how you doing? And you go like, Gore did something that was weird, and Bush did something that was normal. So for the people who were undecided at that point, they had heard more policy from these guys than they could shake a stick at. But what they figured out at that moment was, I think Bush is normal, and I think Gore's a little strange. And so I do think there are these moments that reveal and what matters about that is that tells you how they're going to react when they're in the chair, when they're in the moment. Because let me tell you something, everybody. Having sat there 10 years ago next week, when a storm hits New Jersey like hit New Orleans a few years earlier, and you've lost 365,000 of your homes in 24 hours, and 2/3 of the state's without power. There's no operating water treatment or wastewater treatment plants in the entire state. Every one of your major highways is blocked. And the nuclear plant can't get cooled because they can't turn on their power. Man, there's no 8-minute answer to that question. It's like you're in the moment and you've got to make decisions. And that comes down to character. Am I confident enough to bring in smarter people than me to give me good advice? Am I confident enough to listen to that advice? Am I connected enough to be able to distillate that advice into something that's an actionable thing that can help? And in those ways, revealing character in my view, is much more important than whatever your 6-point white paper plan is on what you're going to do about the deficit. And so I think these are useful. I think they do reveal. Could they be better? They always could be better. But we're going to give people an excuse not to do them. And that, to me, would be much more harmful than, having them the way they are now.
Do we have time for one more question? One more? Go ahead.
Okay, last one. What have you found to be the most effective ways of finding common ground with people who have very different political views?
I will defer to the governor here because he's actually governed, which I haven't done. Campaign people we don't have to search for common ground. We're looking for differences to accentuate. If you're the governor and you got a Democratic legislature, by nature, and as long as, it's my own view, and I'm defer to the governor here because compromise is not a dirty word. I mean, that's what you have. You can't do anything without it. I mean, you have a political argument, you push it as far as you can, then at some point, it's got to break. And, when you were criticized by some Republicans for, working with Obama, that's what you're supposed to do. I didn't bother me at all. I don't like DeSantis worth a damn, but Biden was nice to him. He should be nice. He's the governor of Florida. He's president of the United States. Florida is a state in the United States, a rather prominent one. And you see this all the time. The legislature, the budgets, the everything else. Sometimes you just got to force things and force people to do it and understand that in a country, we learn in the fourth grade, we have the judicial, executive, and the legislative, or whatever Rick Perry said we had, and it was kind of the founders rigged the deal where you had to compromise. That's why the whole deal was. They wanted to limit what the president could do this, the Congress did this, do that, and it was just like forcing you. Just like when the Constitution was nothing but a series of compromises. I mean, the Senate was a compromise. The Electoral College was a compromise. And some people say, well, you would have liked 6-year terms. I would have liked, popular vote for but you do what you got to do to get what you can do. So, what happens is they do something and they say, well, Biden got this passed, but it didn't go far enough. So, okay, it's like Lincoln signs Emancipation Proclamation. Doesn't apply to border states. Roosevelt signed Social Security, exempts ag workers. And so our thing is like, when something gets done, we find the one thing that's wrong with it, and we say, well, it wasn't enough. You know what I'm saying? You have some transformative legislation and things that happen. I mean, in our country's history, that when you, by nature, you compromise, it means somebody had to give something up to get something else. It's like a trade, you have a baseball trade. Well, you're not going to get somebody for nothing. It's just a question of who got the best end of the deal. It's just the nature of it, and we so conditioned to think that everything is right or wrong. When the truth of the matter is, some things are just necessary.
Yeah, look, I confronted this every day for 8 years. I'm a Republican governor in a blue state with a Democratic legislature with significant majorities, like 25-15 in the Senate, 50-30 in the lower house. Yeah. Not like it's close. Like, oh, I got to pick 1 or 2 votes off. Yeah, I got to pick off like 10 or 15. So you've got to decide in the beginning, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a show, or do you want to get something done? If you want to have a show, easy to do, especially where I'm from. You've got the New York and the Philadelphia media market covering you every day. You could have one of the greatest shows on earth and have the media to cover you to do it. I decided very early on that I didn't care when I got to the end of it whether people said, I love him. I wanted them to say he was a governor of consequence. And to do that, I had to compromise. So how do you do that? The one thing that I think we're missing in Washington more than anything else now are personal relationships. You know, one of the best bits of political advice I ever got was someone told me one time, remember something, Chris, it's a lot harder to hate up close. And I think we're at such a distance right now in Washington, physical distance, that you don't develop those relationships. So, you know, I dealt with the same Senate president for 8 years. He was the president of the Iron Workers Union in New Jersey. Imagine, right? He would call me regularly on evenings at 11 or 11:30 at night after he left a bar where he had been drinking. And the phone would ring, and I'd be in bed, and my wife would look at me and say, seriously? Are you going to answer it? And I'm like, you bet your ass I'm answering it. And I would get on that phone, and he would yell at me about something or complain about something. I'd just sit and listen to him like, Steve, you're right, absolutely, yup, nope, we're going to work on that, buddy, don't you worry about it. And the next morning, he would call me and say, what did we talk about last night?
He was
I
drunk.
say to him, yeah, and I say, nothing big. We just caught up. We developed a personal relationship that allowed us to do this. To change it from what James talked about, it was no longer a zero-sum game. It wasn't I win, you lose. It was he and I sitting with each other saying, how do we both win? How do I get some of what I want and I give you some of what you want, or vice versa? And because we were friends, we cared about that for each other. Not just for the state, but for us. Like, he wanted me to do well. And I wanted him to do well because I liked him. I spent more time in those 8 years talking to people I couldn't stand than I could count. But I talked to all of them because the ones who weren't in leadership, man, they wanted to be in leadership. And I'd call them into the governor's office to talk to them about a bill of theirs that I could have given a shit about. But it was their bill. And I'd say, Bill, tell me about this bill on mattress tags. I'm fascinated. And if it gets to me, this is a legitimate bill, by the way. I'm not making this up. Because if this bill gets to me, I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I know it's your bill. And I'd really like you to tell me why you think it's so important, because I don't know and I want to learn. This guy, I'll never forget this guy. He's sitting in the office and he's looking around. I'm sitting in the office where Woodrow Wilson sat. It's filled with history. It's the second oldest continuously operating state house in America behind Maryland. And this guy's looking around and I know what he's thinking. He's like, this is a cool office. Maybe I could be governor. This would be cool. What's that, Governor? I said, tell me about what you think. Now, to be honest, I could have cared less what he thought. But I wanted to give him the chance to tell me. And when he left that office, he went down the hall to every one of the members of his caucus and said, yeah, you know what? It's just down in the governor's office. You know my mattress tag bill? He's interested. And you know what? He didn't know a lot about it, but he asked me what I thought he should do. I told him. I sat him down and I said, Governor, this is what you should do. And when he left, he said, thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate you filling me in on that, and I'm going to take that under consideration. Now, after you do that a couple of times, when you call that guy on a vote you really need, and you say to him, Bill, I need you on this one. And I know it's not going to be an easy one for you, but remember, I signed that mattress tag bill. When you had that guy you wanted to be a judge, who appointed him? I did. I didn't know the guy from Adam, Bill, but you told me he was a good man, and I believed you. I'm telling you, this is something the state needs. Do this for me. And he looked at me and go, oh, it's going to be hard, Governor. I said, I know. And you know what? Bill, when we do it, we're going to go out there, we're going to do it together. Right in front of the cameras, me and you. Really? I said, you bet your ass. That's the way you do it. These are human beings, everybody. And we're treating it like it's some scientific formula. It isn't. It's about helping that person get to where they want to get to, so you can get to where you want to get to, so that the country or the state can get where they want to get to. And sometimes you're going to fail, and you can't be bitter about it. You got to go, okay, next case, next opportunity. So this is about personal relationships more than it's about anything else. And, you know, if you can do that, and you have and it has to be in our system, it's got to be the president or the governor. A legislator can't be the initiator. The president or governor, the decider, has to be the one to put themselves out there and spend the time to do it. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't have achieved a third of what I achieved in 8 years if I hadn't been willing to spend the time with the drunken phone calls and the mattress tag bills and the judge that I didn't know who I appointed and the prosecutor who I appointed and all this stuff that you did that may have seemed like a big deal to them. I mean, I had a guy come in who wanted somebody to be appointed a workers' compensation judge. And it was the most important thing to him because this guy was his best friend. My chief of staff said to me, you didn't even heard of that guy. You going to appoint him? I said, what do I give a damn? I said, this guy's going to do something for me in return at some point that's going to be really important. And if the workers' comp judge is the most important thing to him, who the hell am I to judge what the most important thing to him is? I didn't elect these people. I didn't send them here. The people sent them to me. And I had to deal with them. And the best way to deal with them is to make them your friend. And I had the Senate president, now it's a new Senate president, who I saw recently, and he said to me, you know what? If I had a vote in my caucus, in the Democratic caucus, they'd vote to have you back in 15 seconds because you talk to all of them. That's what you sign up for. And if you're unwilling to do that, then don't take the job.
For all of you. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Bill.
This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can we thank them both for giving us...
Thank you, brother.
an enlightening evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. You guys are great.
Well
Thank you very much.
That was great.
This guy was great.
It was wonderful. You get a prize. Thank you.